أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We seek protection and refuge and salvation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from our enemy, Shaitan the accursed, Shaitan the rejected. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the especially gracious. All praise and all thanks and all glories belong to none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to assist us. We beg Allah ta'ala to forgive us. We have faith and we have reliance only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we fly for refuge and protection and salvation onto Allah from the mischief and from the malice and from the evil of our own selves. And we fly for refuge and protection and salvation onto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the bad consequences of our misdeeds, of our sins and our mistakes. And whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides and leads, no one and nothing can mislead and misguide that one. And whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows to go into error, mostly due to the choices that that person has chosen to do, be it kufr, be it haram, be it whatever that is wrong, then no one and nothing can guide that one. And I stand this day and I bear witness to the fact, to the testimony, openly, that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah, and I further bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is Allah's servant and messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admonishes and reminds the believers in the Quran of their duty to Him when He says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. O you who believe, O you who have faith, be mindful of Allah. Be conscientious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as He has the right that you should be conscientious of Him, that you should be mindful of Him, and do not die. Do not leave this world except as Muslims. Do not go into your graves 6 feet into the ground except as Muslims. Those who struggle and strive to align their will to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a reality for all of us and to count us amongst the Muslimin, the believers, the righteous and the pious, until the second moment that we die, subhanAllah. I'm now about to proceed. Brothers and sisters in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the King of the universe, declares in Surah Al-Mu'minun, ayah number 1 and 2. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala there says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون. The translation of these two ayatain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is declaring and saying, indeed successful are the believers, and then He gives a quality of those types of believers that will be successful. Indeed successful are the believers. Which ones? And He gives a list of these qualities of the believers that will be successful. But the number one thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here in this surah is those believers who offer their salah with khushu. What's khushu? So just a general comment and statement about it. Khushu is to attain the state of prayer, of salah, to be humble and to be submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to feel the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when we're in the prayer, we're in a communication with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have this quality that the prayer transforms the spirit of the believer and lifts them to where they need to be. So today, inshallah, with the tawfiq and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want to very briefly remind myself first and foremost, and then you inshallah, of some of the gems and jewels of salah. 3 parts of the salah, which are critical aspects of the salah. And to reflect upon that, so that inshallah we may go towards this goal of praying our salah with khushu, inshallah, with concentration, with humbleness, submissiveness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So today I want to reflect with you on the aspects of salah related to the takbir, when we say Allahu Akbar, what we state in the ruku, the symbology of ruku, and in the sajda. So with regards to the takbir, when we say Allahu Akbar, and our prayer starts with this, and pretty much every position when we change in the salah, we say the statement. So what is the significance? What's the gem and the jewels of this statement? So the root of this phrase comes from the 3 triliteral root of kaf, ba, and ra, which means literally great. And when we say kabir, it's the elevated or super elevated format of great. And sometimes when we see the translation of Allahu Akbar, it's translated as Allah is great. Allah Ta'ala is great. And sometimes you see the translation of Allahu Akbar as Allah is the greatest. E-S-T. But the scholars of the linguistics of Arabic, they mention that the closest translation to translating Allahu Akbar is Allahu Akbar is Allah is greater. G-R-E-A-T-E-R. Now when you say Allahu Akbar and you translate it as Allah is greater, Allah is greater. Is this a complete thought or an incomplete thought? Is this a complete sentence or an incomplete sentence? It's incomplete, right? Allah is greater. Greater than what? So as it relates to salah, the scholars mention, when we have purified our clothing, when we have made the wudu, when we have found the qibla, when we have made intention, and we're about to stand, when we say Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater. You are literally casting the world behind you. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of you. And you're saying Allah is greater. Greater than what? Allah, you fill in the blank. Allah is greater than anything that would come to our minds and hearts at that second and at that time. Allah is greater than that. And with regards to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Zumar, the 39th chapter of the Quran, ayah number 67. Allah there says, وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدَرِهِ وَالْأَرْضُ جَمِيعًا قَبْضَتُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَالسَّمَاوَاتُ مَطْوِيَاتٌ بِيَمِينِهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى عَمَّا يُشْرِكُونَ, which translates to mean that they have not given a correct appraisal, assessment, and justice to the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way Allah ta'ala deserves. And the earth in its entirety will be gripped by Allah ta'ala on the day of judgment. And the heavens will be rolled up in His right hand. And glorified is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalted or above is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that which they associate. So brothers and sisters in Islam, what we learn from this ayah, and as it relates to Allahu Akbar, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us that we have not given the correct assessment and appraisal of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way Allah ta'ala deserves. So the question to myself and to you, brothers and sisters in Islam, why is it that when we say Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater, and we're saying that with our tongues, in our minds and hearts, things beside the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to our mind. And again, Allah is saying, we have not justified, we have not given the correct appraisal and assessment of the greatness of Allah, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves. And in a hadith that complements this, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that on the Day of Judgment, when Allah seizes the earth, as explained in this ayah, the question will be asked, where are the kings of the earth? When Allah is the King of kings, where are the kings of the earth? So how is it, why am I lying to myself? And why are we lying to ourselves? When we say Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater. And we say Allah is greater, and then what comes in our minds is our jobs, our works, our families, what I have to do next, the tasks at work, what I did yesterday, I'm hungry now, what am I going to eat later, what am I going to do tomorrow, so on and so forth. Everything comes to our mind except the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that the action item to myself and to you is to think about this and internalize this meaning that Allah is greater than whatever comes to our mind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than that, and that we have not done the justice that in appraising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and assessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and evaluating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatness the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves. Allahu Akbar. Allah is greater. May Allah give me tawfiq, and you tawfiq inshallah, to internalize this. The second part we want to reflect upon is what we do in the ruku. So in the ruku, we say the statement, Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. And the root of this word, the first part of this, of Subhan, comes again from the triliteral root of Sin, Ba, and Ha. And this Subh literally means Sin, Ba, and Ha. This triliteral root literally means that which floats, that which glides, that which stays above. And when we add the alif and the noon here, and we say Subhan, the scholars mean that this is the exaggerated format of that. That extremely, overwhelmingly, above, glorified, floating or gliding is who? Rabbi. Who's Rabbi? Rabb, obviously, one of the translations of Rabb is master. And when we say be, it means my master. So how glorified, extremely, overwhelmingly glorified and perfected is my master. And so this is talking about Allah Ta'ala. This should internalize to us the meaning of how perfected Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is. How glorified Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is, our master. And brothers and sisters in Islam, the scholars mentioned, look at the moment in the second in Salah that you're declaring this and that I'm declaring this. This is our normal stance when we're standing. This is our normal stance, this is our perfected stance. When we're in ruku, we're like this. We're off balance. We're in a non-perfected state. We're in a state where we're off. And at that second and at that moment, then the thought should come to our mind that how perfected and how glorified and how above anything that anyone would associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah ta'ala is above that. Glorified that is above Allah ta'ala above that. Perfected is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala above that. And again, we're saying that in a non-perfected state. We're off balance. We're about to fall down if you don't hold yourself in ruku, subhanAllah. And the second thing we state in this part of this Subhana Rabbi al-Azim is the statement of Azim. And this, the root of this, the scholars mention, is bone. This Ayn, Wat, and Meen. This triliteral root comes from bone. And when you think about the symbology of bone, what is bone? But the bone is what holds the structure together. Our bodies, without our bones, what would we be? We'd be basically vegetables, subhanAllah. It's what holds us together. This beautiful building, mashallah, and it goes with regards to pretty much everything. You remove the skin, this internal walls in here. Behind this, you have the skeleton. The frame of the building, so to speak. If you take that frame down, you take that column down, what's going to happen to this building? The whole building will collapse and fall down. So it's a symbolic, this root, and Azim is talking about constantly, overwhelmingly strong and firm and powerful. And who is that referring to? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah ta'ala is al-azim. This is one of His attributes glorified as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most powerful, the most strong, the most firm. And again, brothers and sisters in Islam, the scholars mention, when you're in ruku, and you're down like this, you are, and I am, in a state where basically you are weak. This is one of our most exposed parts, subhanAllah. I'm a grown man, almost mashallah 200 pounds. If I'm like this in ruku, and I'm doing this, a little kid could come and just bump me and I would fall down flat on my face, subhanAllah. So again, we're humbling ourselves to the perfectness, to the awesomeness, to the glorified self that Allah Ta'ala is, who is the most strong, who is the most powerful. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim. The last part with regards to the thing that we want to reflect on, inshallah, is when we are in the sajda, in the state of prostration on the ground, when we put our face on the ground and we say Subhan Rabbi al-A'la. And again, this Subhan refers to how glorified and constantly perfected and above is Rabbi, my master, al-A'la, who's the most high. And again, brothers and sisters in Islam, look at the symbology of that. You're stating, and I'm stating at that moment, when we're in our lowest, when we're at our most humble position, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our master, is the most high. And how honorable of a state, how honorable of a position that is to recognize that and to be in that position, subhanAllah. So, how perfect and how glorified is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is our master, the most high. Inshallah, in the second part of the khutbah, we'll have some concluding parts with regards to these three parts of salah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me tawfiq, inshallah, to recognize the jewels and the gems of salah, for us to, inshallah, raise the condition of the states of our salah, to where we truly put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of us and throw the world behind, and recognize how great Allah is, greater than anything we can think of, and how powerful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, and how glorified and perfected He is, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most high. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fi Qur'an al-Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-hakim innahu ta'ala jawazun kareem wa lakum ghafurur rahim. Let us ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a sabr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد في الأولين اللهم صل على محمد في الآخرين اللهم بارك على محمد في الأولين اللهم بارك على محمد في الآخرين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد proceed. So brothers and sisters in Islam, we've been talking about the three aspects of salah related to the takbir that we mentioned in the salah. That we mentioned that this literally means Allah is greater. And the scholars mention as it relates to salah that we should internalize the meaning of this, that Allah is greater than anything that would come to mind. So whatever comes to mind, we should remove that and cast that away and put the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in front of us, inshallah. And we've been reflecting upon the ruku and the symbology of what the ruku is. That in the ruku we are in a state that's not our normal state. We're in a state of unperfectness. We're in a state of weakness. And in that state, we are stating how perfect, how awesome, how glorified Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, who is the most strong, who is the most powerful, who is the most firm, subhanAllah. And we've been reflecting about the sajda and the symbology of it, that in the state where our face, subhanAllah, the most honorable part of our body, is on the ground, and it can't go any lower than that. And if it were to go any lower than that, we would be in our graves. It's even lower than, subhanAllah, our bottoms and our backs, subhanAllah. And at that moment, we are declaring how perfected and how high, the most high, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, I'll conclude with this thought, inshallah. Brother Joshua Evans, I don't know if you guys have heard of him. MashaAllah, Ali. He has a story on the internet of how he came to Islam. May Allah ta'ala keep him on Islam, may he die on Islam, inshallah. He has this very interesting story on this quest that he took to find the truth. And I encourage all of you, inshallah, to go on YouTube and go check out the story. You just simply type in how the Bible led me to Islam. Go check it out. It's very interesting out of this quest and this path that he took. But I'll just give you, inshallah, as it relates to our subject today, the conclusion of his story and how it ties to the salah and these three components of salah that we've been talking about. He mentioned that after this long quest that he went through, this man was born a Christian. And he was a young man, and he lived in the Bible Belt in South Carolina. And subhanAllah, he tried very hard, so to speak, to be a Christian. Reading the Bible, reading the Old Testament. He even went through the effort of learning Hebrew so that he can learn and read in the original language of Hebrew with regards to the Old Testament. And how he went and basically studied every other religion, every other ism that was out there. But in the end, through the events that he describes in the story, he talks about how Allah Ta'ala guided him to the masjid. And he said one of the most important things that he saw. He was basically in a gathering just like this, in Jumu'ah. And he was sitting in the back, and the Imam, after he finished the khutbah, the Iqamah was called, and everybody stood up. And everybody stood in line, in the saf, in the lines. And when he observed, and he says that I observed the ruku and the sujood, the sajda, the salah of the Muslims. He said, all the books that I had read, you know, be it from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and all the other isms that they had read, he saw that the righteous people, he knew that there was tainting in there. He said that it was messed up. There was a lot of things that got changed about those old books. Like he talks about the Old Testament. He's like, I read it in Hebrew and I would read a paragraph and it would be like the most amazing language. Then you read another paragraph and it's like mumbo jumbo. Then you read another paragraph and